welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. And today, I'm bringing you my new original story.
Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. This is a horror story called The Mercer Building. The dispatch call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, which was already wrong because nothing good ever comes out of a Tuesday in October. The call was routine. Possible trespasser reported at the old Mercer Building on Fifth and Harlow, the decommissioned 8-story office complex that the city had been promising to demolish for 4 years running. Routine. Marcus Webb and Danny Crosse took the call because they were the closest unit, because they were both young and hadn't yet learned that routine is just a word people use before the world decides to show them something new. The Mercer Building had been empty since 2018, when the architectural firm that occupied the top 3 floors quietly relocated to Columbus, and the last of the lower-level tenants, a dental practice, a tax preparation office, a company that sold industrial cleaning supplies, followed suit within the year. Something about the heating system, people said. Something about the smell in the stairwells. Something about the way the building settled at night, making sounds that the maintenance staff described in the formal language of their incident reports as anomalous structural groaning, inconsistent with standard thermal contraction. The last property manager, a man named Reyes, who had worked the building for 11 years, had resigned in writing on a Thursday in April, with a letter that said only, "I am not able to continue in this capacity, and I am not able to explain why." The building owners had chalked this up to stress. His former colleagues said he didn't talk about it. His wife said that after he quit, he slept better for the first time in years, and that was explanation enough for her. The city had fenced it, posted notices, done all the things cities do when they want to appear to be handling a problem while actually just making the problem more official. The fence had been cut in so many places that the city's public works department had stopped repairing it. Kids went in sometimes, urban explorers, teenagers looking for a place to drink and frighten each other with flashlights. 3 of those teenagers had called 911 from outside the building in the past 2 years. One of them had refused to say what she'd seen inside. The other 2 said they hadn't seen anything, which was statistically plausible and which nobody believed. Marcus drove. He was 26, 2 years on the force, the kind of person who filled out forms thoroughly and arrived places early and had never once in his life left a dish in the sink overnight. He had a face that people trusted instinctively, broad, honest, the face of someone who would find your lost dog and not expect a reward. He'd grown up in Garfield Heights, the son of a pipe fitter and a school librarian, and he believed in work and procedure and the proposition that most problems have solutions if you approach them correctly. Danny rode shotgun. He was 24 and had been on the job for 8 months and still thought about quitting at least 3 times a week, not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't sure the work was right for him. He'd studied literature in college before switching to criminal justice. He still read a lot, actually. He was reading a Stephen King novel right now. Actually, it was in his jacket pocket, paperback, its spine so broken it fell open on its own to page 211. He'd been trying to finish it for 3 weeks. Something kept interrupting him. "Trespasser," Marcus said, pulling up to the curb on Harlow. He put the cruiser in park, and they both looked at the building. The building looked back. That was the only way Danny could describe it later to the counselor the department made him see, that the building looked back at them. 8 stories of dark glass and limestone that had been handsome once, in the way that office buildings from the 1970s occasionally managed, all clean lines and architectural ambition, now gone brown and streaked with something that wasn't quite rust and wasn't quite mold. The windows on the upper floors were dark. The lobby windows were boarded on the inside, but in the gap between 2 of the boards on the 4th floor, there was a light, pale, yellowish, the color of old teeth. "Jesus," Danny said, very quietly. "Stay close," Marcus said. They went in. The lobby was a cathedral of abandonment. The reception desk, a long arc of dark wood, once impressive, had buckled under years of unregulated moisture. The carpet, a corporate burgundy, had gone black in patches and peeled up at the corners to reveal the concrete underneath. The elevators were dead, their doors fixed half open, the shafts beyond them full of a darkness that the flashlight beams didn't so much illuminate as push around. Something dripped somewhere in the building, steadily, the way a clock ticks when you're trying to sleep. The stairwell door was propped open with a chunk of masonry. "Fourth floor," Marcus said, remembering the light. He took the stairs first, one hand on the railing, his flashlight playing up the walls. The stairwell had been painted a municipal green sometime in the 1980s, and the paint had gone gray and blistered, and in one long section of wall between the second and third floors, someone had written something in black marker, something large, filling the entire section, and when Danny got close enough to read it, he stopped walking. "Marcus!" "What?" "Look at this." Marcus came back down 2 steps and shone his light on the writing. It wasn't words. It was the same shape, repeated dozens of times, covering every inch of available wall. A circle with something inside it, something that looked like a face in the way that a cracked windshield looks like a spider web, only by association, only if you let your brain make the connection, and once it made the connection, you couldn't unmake it. A face with too many features, too many lines where lines shouldn't be, too many teeth implied in the circle's lower curve. The circles had been drawn with apparent urgency, overlapping in places, some of them incomplete, as if the artist had been interrupted. Below the last circle, a single word, also in marker, in letters smaller than the drawings. "Still here." "Kids," Marcus said, after a moment. His voice was steady. "Sure," Danny said. He looked at the word for another second. The letters were even, careful, not the frantic scrawl of someone frightened or drunk. Someone had stood in this stairwell and written that word with deliberation. He thought about that, and then decided to stop thinking about it. They kept going. The 4th floor. The stairwell door had swollen in its frame, and Marcus had to put his shoulder into it twice before it gave, opening onto a corridor that stretched away in both directions into darkness. The corridor was standard office building design, dropped ceiling, fluorescent light fixtures empty of tubes, doors on both sides, some open, some closed. The carpet here was lighter, a beige that had gone gray, and it had been disturbed recently. Footprints, multiple sets, going in both directions. The freshest ones, Danny noted, faced toward the north stairwell. They were large, and they were spaced very far apart, as if whatever had made them was moving quickly. At the far end of the corridor, through the glass partition of what had been a corner conference room, the light was still there, pale, yellowish, not moving. "Police," Marcus called. His voice sounded muffled, like it was being absorbed by the building itself, swallowed before it could travel. "Sir or ma'am, this is the Cleveland Police Department. This building is condemned property. Please make yourself known." Silence. Not the ordinary silence of an empty building. This was different, the silence of a room holding its breath. "Sir or ma'am, this is the Cleveland Police Department. This building is condemned property. Please make yourself known." The light didn't move. They walked toward it. Marcus kept his hand near his holster without touching it. Danny kept his flashlight moving, into the open offices on either side, across the ceiling, back to the corridor ahead. The offices were empty, desks left behind, some of them, because they weren't worth moving. Filing cabinets, a mug that still had a company logo on it, a wall calendar open to July. They were 30 feet from the conference room when the light went out. Not gradually, not a flicker. One instant it was there, that pale, unhealthy glow, and the next it was gone. And they were standing in a corridor lit only by their 2 flashlight beams, and somewhere, not in the conference room, Danny would have sworn, somewhere closer, somewhere behind them, something exhaled. Not breathed, exhaled, the way you exhale when you've been holding your breath for a long time and something has finally given you permission to let it go. A long, slow exhalation, almost contemplative, almost satisfied. Marcus spun. His flashlight swept the corridor behind them. Empty. "We're leaving," Danny said. He didn't say it like a question. "We need to clear the floor first," Marcus said. "Marcus, procedure." Danny hated that word at that moment more than he had ever hated any word in his life. He looked at the corridor behind them, at the unmoving shadows, at the closed doors on either side, at the dead fluorescent fixtures above, and he thought, something is in here with us. He had no evidence for this beyond the smell and the sound and the absolute cellular certainty of a prey animal that knows it is not alone. "Quick," he said. "We clear it quick and we leave." "Quick," Marcus agreed. They turned toward the conference room, and the door at the end of the corridor, the door to the emergency stairwell on the building's north side, the door they had not come through, opened slowly on its own, without sound. The door swung to its full extent and held there, open to a blackness that the flashlights could not penetrate. And from that blackness came the smell, concentrated now, electric and old and deeply wrong, and the temperature in the corridor dropped 5 degrees in the space of 5 seconds. He felt it on his face. He felt his breath beginning to steam. And something stepped out of the dark. What came through the door was not, at first, identifiable as anything. That was the worst part, Danny would think later. Not that it was obviously monstrous, not that it announced itself with the theatrical violence of a nightmare. It was the wrongness of it. The way the brain kept trying to find a category for what the eyes were sending and coming empty, like a search engine returning no results for a query that should have an answer. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, maybe more. It was using the door frame the way a person uses a door frame, ducking slightly, adjusting its passage through the opening. It moved with deliberate slowness, the way something moves when it knows you can see it and wants you to look, wants you to understand the scope of what you're seeing. Their flashlight beams found it at the same time. It was wearing the shape of a person, the way a coat wears the shape of the person who left it on the floor. Approximately right, structurally plausible, but wrong in every proportion and detail. Too tall, the torso too long, the legs slightly too short for the torso, creating a top heaviness that shouldn't have been ambulatory. The arms were the worst, the forearms hanging nearly to the knee, the fingers, if they were fingers, if that word still applied, reaching further still, nearly brushing the carpet and moving very slightly, independently, like the tendrils of a sea creature feeling the water for information. It was dressed in something, or the appearance of something, or the memory of clothing. Dark fabric that didn't hang quite right, that moved when the thing moved a half second too late, as if the clothes and the creature were 2 separate entities in loose cooperation. Its head was turned toward them at an angle that a human neck does not permit, turned fully to the left, resting on the left shoulder, the chin pointing at them like a compass needle. The posture of a broken thing, the posture of something that had learned orientation from watching, had gotten the general principle right, but missed a crucial detail. Its face. Marcus fired his flashlight beam directly at its face for 2 full seconds, and then pointed the flashlight on the floor. "Don't look at the face," he said. His voice was perfectly level. There was no tremor in it, no rise in pitch, nothing that betrayed what he had just seen. This was the bravest thing Danny had ever witnessed in his life. Danny had already looked. He would not describe what he had seen to anyone, not to the counselor, not to Marcus, not to himself in the small hours when memory became hallucinatory. What he was able to say to the counselor when pressed, when she asked him just to tell her one thing about it so she could understand, what he said was, it was like looking at something that had learned what a face was supposed to do from a description rather than from experience. The components were present, eyes or the suggestion of them, mouth or the negative space of one. The arrangement was not. The arrangement was achieved by something that understood face as function, as a surface for signaling, for communication, for expressing the interior to the exterior, but did not understand it as structure, as the physical result of bone and cartilage and the specific mathematics of evolved symmetry. It was a face assembled by something that had only ever seen faces from the inside. It stood in the doorway. It made a sound, not a voice, not any animal noise Danny had a word for, but something between them, something with organization in it, with rhythm and recurrence, and the architecture of speech without the substance, like hearing a language you have never encountered and recognizing it as language anyway, recognizing the shape of it before you can identify a single word. The sound went on for perhaps 4 seconds, then it stopped. The thing seemed to be waiting. "Back up, slow, don't run," Marcus said quietly. Danny backed up. He kept his flashlight aimed at the thing's chest, below the face, above the 2 long hands. The thing's chest moved as if breathing, a slow expansion and contraction, though the timing was wrong, too slow, once every 8 or 10 seconds. It stepped fully into the corridor. The door swung shut behind it without anyone touching it, without the click of a latch, as smoothly and certainly as a door pulled shut by a hand. It looked at them, or it oriented toward them. The distinction felt important, and Danny could not have explained why. It took 1 step toward them. The step was soundless. Its foot met the carpet, and the carpet made no sound, and the floor made no sound, and the building made no sound, and the silence was worse than any noise would have been. A second step. The 2 long fingers flexed at its sides. "Run," Marcus said. They ran.
They went up because going down meant passing it. That was Danny's decision, made in the half-second they had on the landing between the 4th and 5th floors, when Marcus gestured down and Danny grabbed his arm and shook his head and pointed up. Marcus understood immediately. You don't go down when something is between you and down. You go up and you find another way out. They took the stairs 2 at a time, behind them, and Danny could not tell how far behind, whether 10 steps or 2, because the building had swallowed the sound of its movement completely. The thing followed, not running, not hurrying, just following, at the deliberate pace of something that has all the time it needs and knows it. The calm of something that has never been outrun. 5th floor. Marcus tried the stairwell door. Locked. He hit it with his shoulder twice and it didn't give. Something clicked in the lock mechanism, or something that sounded like a lock, sounded like a mechanism, mechanical and precise, but the door did not open. Keep going. 6th floor. The door opened. They piled through it, and Marcus immediately put his back against it, keeping it closed, and for 5 seconds they both stood there listening to what was on the other side. Silence. Then 1 step on the landing below. Then another. The sound of something ascending without urgency. "Move," Marcus said. The 6th floor was different from the 4th. An office design firm had been here. There was a logo still on the wall, interlocking circles, the kind of logo that looked modern in 2015 and dated by 2018, and they had left in something like a hurry or had cared less about what they abandoned. Personal items remained, a woman's green cardigan draped over an office chair as if its owner had just stepped away, a child's crayon drawing pinned to a corkboard, a house and 2 stick figures and a sun, the kind of drawing that is identical across every culture in the world. A coffee mug on a windowsill with something dark and calcified in the bottom. A framed photo on a desk, face down. Danny didn't turn it over. He didn't want to see a face right now, however human. "Barricade the door," Marcus said. They dragged a filing cabinet across the stairwell door, heavy, 4 drawers, still loaded with old paper, the accumulated documentation of a business that no longer existed. It took both of them 30 seconds of straining and controlled breathing, and when it was in place, Marcus stepped back and they both watched the door. Nothing happened. 2 minutes. 3. Nothing. "Call it in," Danny said. Marcus already had his radio out. He pressed the button. Static. Not the clean static of a dead channel, but something textured, organized, the static that sounds like a voice in a language you don't speak. He adjusted the channel, tried again. The organized static deepened. Marcus walked to the exterior windows, the outside wall of the building facing 5th Street, and tried from there. The signal bars on his radio read full. The transmission went nowhere. "I can't raise dispatch." "Phones?" No signal. Not one bar on either phone, and they were standing 10 feet from a window, from the open air. Danny had had 3 bars 20 minutes ago, sitting in the cruiser on Harlow. Now there was nothing. The phones showed signal strength indicators that sat at 0, with the flat certainty of instruments that are not receiving interference, but are receiving something that isn't signal, something that fills the available spectrum the way water fills a container. "Buildings do that," Marcus said. "Old construction, thick walls." "Marcus." Danny lowered his voice, though there was no reason to, except that the room felt like the kind of room you lower your voice in. "That thing in the corridor." "I know. What do you... I don't know what it is." "Okay." Danny pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He saw the face briefly in the dark behind his eyelids. He opened his eyes. "We need to get out. Fire escape. Most buildings this age have them on the exterior. Office building windows don't open from inside. We break one." Marcus looked at him for a moment and then nodded. It was the nod of a man who has discarded the procedures that no longer apply and is operating on pure necessity. "We break one." They moved through the 6th floor with flashlights pointed at the ground, not dark, but dimmed, moving through their own small circles of light. The floor plan was an open bullpen, long work tables, and empty monitor stands. Danny checked behind them every 10 steps. The filing cabinet had not moved. The door was shut. The corner office was in the building's southeast corner, a real office, enclosed, the kind the senior people got. Floor-to-ceiling windows, larger than the bullpen glass. Danny pressed his flashlight against the exterior pane and looked. The fire escape landing was right there, an iron platform extending from the facade, and the ladder descending in zigzags toward the alley below. He picked up a desk chair by its back. The first swing cracked the glass in a starburst pattern. The second punched a hole through the center. The third took out the entire lower pane, glass cascading outward and down and ringing on the iron of the fire escape landing. Cold air rushed in immediately. Real air, city air, the smell of October and exhaust, and the distant promise of rain. And Danny stood in the window opening and breathed it, and felt briefly that he was going to be all right. "You first," Marcus said. "I found that you first, Danny." His voice was patient and final, the voice of someone who has looked at the situation clearly and made the calculation. "I'll be right behind you." Danny stepped through the broken window onto the fire escape landing. The iron was wet and cold under his boots, slightly slick, the most solid thing he had touched in the last half hour. He stepped back from the opening to give Marcus room. Marcus stepped through, and the filing cabinet on the other side of the closed office door began to move. They heard it clearly, the deep scrape of metal on hardwood, heavy and purposeful, the cabinet moving back the way they had moved it into place, and then the sound of the door handle moving, and then the door, pushing against the retreating cabinet, opening. They moved down the fire escape without speaking. Their boots rang on the iron grating with a sound that felt dangerously loud in the October silence, and they went fast, not running because the wet metal made running dangerous, but moving at the edge of what was safe, hands on the railing, bodies angled forward. The fire escape descended along the north face of the building, 4 flights to the alley level.
Danny counted the landings. 6th floor, 5th. He looked up once. The creature was at the broken window, standing in the opening they had made, framed by the broken glass, its silhouette clear against the pale light of the office behind it. Its head was at the wrong angle. Its arms hung too long at its sides. It watched them descend with the stillness of something that has no need to pursue. And in that stillness was a patience so absolute it was worse than aggression. Danny looked away. He did not look at the face. "Don't stop," Marcus said from behind him. "I'm not stopping." 4th floor landing, 3rd. Danny kept his eyes on the ladder below him, on the next rung, on his own hands gripping the cold iron. He breathed through his mouth to avoid the smell, which had followed them down from inside and hung in the air around the building like a weather system. 2nd floor landing, 20 feet from the ground. Danny looked up again out of the compulsion that he could not stop, the same compulsion that makes you look at the scene of an accident, even when you don't want to. The 6th floor window was empty. This was not reassuring. Empty windows are only reassuring if you know where the thing that was in the window has gone. Danny did not know. Danny was very much afraid that he knew. He looked down. The fire door at the base of the fire escape, the steel emergency door that opened to the building's 1st floor interior, was standing open. Not broken open, not forced, simply open, swinging gently in the October air, as if someone had just passed through it from the other side, from inside. The creature stood in the doorframe. It had come down through the inside of the building, through the stairwells, and it had arrived at the 1st floor before them. Danny did not understand how this was possible. They had a head start. They were moving fast. The interior stairwells were blocked, and presumably slower, and he understood, in the part of his mind that had been trying to make rational sense of this, and was now giving up on that project, that it moved through the building differently than they did, that the building's interior was not the same for it as it was for things made of ordinary matter. It stood in the doorframe 3 feet from the bottom of the fire escape ladder. It made the sound. Organized, rhythmic, almost syntactical, syllables assembling in the air between them like something being built in real time, and Danny was suspended on the 2nd floor landing with his hands on the railing and his body refusing to move because the sound was different now. The sound had changed from the corridor encounter. It had refined. It had been practicing. He heard his name. Not his full name, not Daniel Crosse, the formal arrangement of letters on his badge, the name on his birth certificate and his bank statements, and the plaque on his locker at the precinct. Just Danny, the 2-syllable diminutive, the childhood name, the name his mother used on Sunday mornings and his friends used when they were genuinely talking to him and not performing conversation, the name that lived in the part of you that remembers being small and known. The creature said his name, or assembled it, or played it back from somewhere it had stored it, the way a recording plays back a sound. Danny's sound, shaped from the organized static of its voice, close enough that his body recognized it before his mind did. His hands tightened on the railing. Marcus pushed past him, not roughly, not with impatience, but with the decisive force of someone who has assessed the situation and identified the action. He got to the railing at the edge of the landing, and without hesitating, without pausing to calculate or reconsider, jumped. 8 feet to the alley surface. He landed and rolled, the way they'd been trained, coming up on one knee and then his feet, and turning back immediately, arms up and open. "Jump," he said. "Danny, jump. I've got you." The creature said Danny's name again, 2 syllables, patient. It had all the time in the world, and it wanted him to know that. Danny looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at him with an expression that was not fear and not command, but something more precise. The face of someone who believes you can do the thing and is telling you so without words. Danny let go of the railing. The fall lasted less than a second, and Marcus was there, absorbing the impact with his own body, and they both went down on the alley surface and came up already running north along the alley toward the gap in the fence, the gravel lot, the parked cruiser on Harlow Street. Danny ran with the total commitment of his body, lungs and legs and arms all in agreement for the first time in his life, every system directed toward the same goal, which was distance. He did not look back. He made the decision not to look back, and he kept it. And Marcus ran beside him, and they hit the chain-link fence gap and went through it. Marcus first, the fence tearing his jacket from shoulder to elbow, and neither of them caring. And they crossed the gravel lot and reached the cruiser, and Marcus had the keys out and the doors unlocked before they arrived. They got in. Marcus started the engine. Danny looked back through the rear window. The creature was at the fence, not at the gap. It was not trying to come through, not attempting the chain link as an obstacle. It stood at the fence line, on the inside, its fingers looped through the chain link with the delicacy that seemed almost gentle. Its head was at the wrong angle, its two long arms hung through the chain link, and its fingers moved slowly, feeling the cold metal, and it was looking at Danny through the rear window with the part of it that served as a face. He did not look at the face. He looked at the hands, at the fingers in the chain link, at the fence line, and the way the creature stood exactly at it, precisely at it, as if the fence were not an obstacle, but a boundary, a line it was not willing to cross, or was not permitted to cross. He thought it didn't follow us out. He thought, why? Marcus pulled away from the curb. At the end of the block, he stopped at a red light, and they sat there in the idling cruiser with the heat running and the radio crackling with the ordinary traffic of the overnight city. A domestic on Euclid, a fender bender on the bridge approach. The traffic light changed to green. "Are you hurt?" Marcus said. He checked. His hands were shaking and would not stop. He was not hurt. "You?" Danny said. "My jacket." Marcus examined the tear at his shoulder. "I liked this jacket." He put the car in gear and drove.
Danny didn't sleep properly for 3 days. Not entirely true. He managed 90-minute stretches in which he didn't dream, which was the best he could ask for, because when he did dream, it was always the corridor, the wrong face, the filing cabinet scraping back across the floor, his name assembled in the dark by something that had no right to know it. He called in sick on Wednesday and Thursday, the first sick days he had ever taken, and on Friday he went back to work because staying home alone was worse. Marcus seemed fine. He answered calls, he filed reports, he drank his coffee and worked his shift and offered no indication that anything had happened. This frightened Danny almost as much as the building had. "How are you doing it?" Danny asked him on Friday night in the break room. "What?" Marcus poured his coffee and looked at it, a long silence. "You know what I was before this?" Marcus said finally. "Before the academy, I worked construction, 3 years. We were doing a renovation on an old hospital in Akron, one of the old ones, early 20th century, big stone building. 3rd week on the job, I was working the basement level alone, doing electrical rough-in." He paused. "I saw something. I don't know what it was. I thought about it every day for a year. Then less, then sometimes, then almost never." He looked up. "It doesn't go away. You just build things around it." "What did you see?" "Something I didn't look at long enough to describe." He picked up his coffee. "Don't look too long, Danny. That's the whole trick." He spent the weekend doing normal things with excessive thoroughness. He cleaned his apartment. He went to a grocery store and stood in the produce section for 10 minutes under the fluorescent lights, the most ordinary light in the world, the light of places where nothing happened. And he bought things he didn't need because he wanted to carry bags through a parking lot like a person who had not recently been in a building that smelled like something too old to have a name. He called his mother on Sunday. He didn't tell her anything. He asked about her week, about whether the gutters had been cleaned before the rain, and he listened to her talk, and he thought, this is what normal sounds like. I know what it sounds like. I will not forget.
On Saturday morning, he drove past the Mercer Building. He didn't stop. He drove past slowly on 5th Street, and the building looked back at him the way it always had. 8 stories, dark glass, the boards on the lobby windows, the pale mark of the fence line where the chain link had worn the gravel bare. He looked for movement on the 4th floor. He looked for the yellowish light. He saw nothing. The building was just a building from the outside. It had always been just a building from the outside. That was the part that would stay with him longest. Not the thing inside, but the ordinary face the building showed the world. How long it had stood on 5th Street looking like nothing. He filed the report on Monday. Unknown trespasser, unable to locate. Building is a safety hazard and should be prioritized for demolition. 3 weeks later, the city scheduled the demolition on November 15th.
They didn't have to be there. Neither of them was assigned to the demolition perimeter. Marcus had a day off. Danny was on duty, but on the east side, covering the sector 3 miles from 5th and Harlow. They were both on 5th Street at 7 in the morning anyway, coffees in hand, collars up against the November cold. The crowd was small. Retirees, city workers on break, a photographer from the Plain Dealer, 2 kids who had clearly skipped school for the occasion. The demolition crew had been working since 6, prepping the charges. The building stood against a gray sky, the color of old concrete, patient as it had always been, waiting as it had always waited. "We shouldn't be here," Danny said. "Probably," Marcus said. The detonation was at 7:43 a.m. The demolition director, a woman in an orange vest and hard hat, raised her radio and said something into it. A warning horn sounded. The crowd stepped back. The charges went in sequence, base to top, the support columns failing in a choreographed cascade, and the Mercer Building performed its final act, folding inward, the floors pancaking, the facade crumbling, the dark glass shattering outward in a brief glittering spray before the dust cloud rose and swallowed everything. The sound arrived a half second after the sight, chest deep, final. The dust rolled across 5th Street. The crowd stepped back further. Danny stepped back with them, but he kept his eyes on the dust cloud, watching for the thing he was waiting for, without knowing he was waiting for it. The fire started from inside. Not from the charges had done their work cleanly and correctly. This fire came from deep within the rubble, from the collapsed interior, and it was pale and yellowish, and Danny recognized it the way you recognize a face you've been trying to forget. It spread through the debris with a speed and purposefulness that was not how fires behave. Fires start reluctant and gather slowly. They spread by following fuel. They obey the physical logic of combustion. This fire moved as if it knew where it was going. Within 40 seconds, the entire rubble pile was ablaze. It burned with a sound. Under the roar of the fire and the shouts of the crowd and the wail of fire engines already inbound, there was the organized syllabic static that Danny knew. He heard it because he had heard it in a corridor on the 4th floor of this building 3 weeks ago, because his nervous system had logged it and would never forget it. He heard it the way you hear a piece of music that once meant something terrible, involuntarily, fully, with no ability to hear it as background. Marcus grabbed his arm. Danny turned, and Marcus's face was open in a way it never was, the mask of competence down, something raw and real underneath. "You hear it?" Danny said. "I hear it." The sound rose as the fire rose. It crested, swelled, and then the last of the standing walls came down, the final section of the north facade collapsing inward in a slow avalanche of brick and glass, and the sound cut off, mid-syllable almost, as if whatever had been speaking had been interrupted or extinguished. The fire burned on in silence, just fire after that, chemical and physical, wood and insulation and the residue of human occupation going to smoke. The fire engines arrived, and the crews went to work, and the crowd dispersed, and the November wind moved the smoke east toward the lake.
Marcus and Danny stood on the sidewalk across 5th Street until the fire was out and the smoke was white and thin, and there was nothing left of the Mercer Building but a foundation filled with rubble and ash, and the absolute absence of whatever it had housed for however long it had housed it. Years, maybe decades, maybe longer than the building itself, the building just the most recent container. Danny stood in the crowd with his coffee cup growing cold in his hand and watched the rubble burn. He thought about the fence. He had thought about the fence every day for 3 weeks, the creature standing at the chain-link boundary, its fingers looped through the metal, not crossing. He had constructed a theory around that image and tested it from different angles, and the theory held. The building was the container. Whatever had been in the Mercer Building was in the Mercer Building, not loose in the city, not moving through walls at will, not following them home down the highway at 11 p.m. Contained. The building was old enough and wrong enough and had accumulated its particular wrongness long enough that it had become a habitat, and the thing inside it could not or would not leave. Demolish the container, and what happened to the thing inside? He had not been able to answer this question in 3 weeks of turning it over. Now, watching the pale fire move through the rubble with its impossible purposefulness, he thought he was seeing the answer. The thing inside was burning. Whether it could burn the way ordinary matter burns, whether fire could end something like that, something that generated its own cold and organized static from the electromagnetic spectrum, and learned the names of the people who came near it, he didn't know. But the fire was pale and yellow, and it moved like intention, and it was burning from the inside out, from the deepest part of the rubble pile outward, as if the thing that had lived in the building was burning itself, as if being expelled from its container was a kind of death, as if the building's destruction was its destruction. The sound said something that was almost a word, and then stopped. The fire settled into its final stage, lower, slower, the pale yellow dimming to ordinary orange and red. Just combustion after that. The smell changed from that deep electrical wrongness to the ordinary smell of a building fire, particulate and chemical and simply sad. "It's done," Marcus said. "Yeah." I looked at the ruins. The pale light was gone. The yellowish glow was gone. The specific cold that the building had generated from within itself was gone. The air over the ruins was just air, just November, just the ordinary atmosphere of a city morning.
They were almost to their cars when Marcus said it. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without drama, as if he were conveying information rather than confessing something that had been sitting in him for 3 weeks. "When I was in the hospital basement," he said, "in Akron, what I saw then," he paused, "it looked at me the way that thing looked at us, like it was learning, like it was filing us somewhere for later." A pause. "I've thought about this for years. I think there's a category of thing in this world that doesn't usually intersect with ours, and when the intersection happens, they learn us, and we learn something about them, and everyone goes their separate ways, and lives are changed, and nobody can talk about it sensibly." Danny considered this. "You think it knew us," he said. "You think it genuinely?" "It knew your name, Danny." "Yeah. Something that is not from here knew your name." Marcus stopped walking. He looked at the smoke rising from the ruins. Whatever that means mechanically, however it works, it had been in that building long enough to learn what names mean to us, the weight of them, and it used yours. He started walking again. "I don't know if that's frightening or just informative." "Frightening," Danny said without hesitation. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "Both." They reached their cars. They stood in the thin light. "You going to be all right?" Marcus said. Danny looked back at the ruins, the smoke, the empty space where the Mercer Building had stood for 40-odd years, accumulating whatever it had accumulated, serving as a container or habitat or anchor for whatever had been in there. Gone now. Whether fire was the answer, whether combustion and demolition could end something like that, he didn't know. He hoped. He thought about the creature at the fence line, those 3 weeks ago, standing precisely at the boundary, not crossing it, watching them leave.
He thought it was contained. The building was the container, and now the container was gone. He thought about what happened to a thing when its container was destroyed. He thought about the sound cutting off mid-syllable, the precise moment of truncation, and whether that was what ending sounded like for something like that. He hoped it was. He hoped the ending was complete. He hoped that whatever had learned his name in a dark corridor on a Tuesday in October was not somewhere right now learning to move through the world without a building to live in, without a fence line to observe, without the patient territorial habits of something that had been in one place for a very long time. He put that thought away. He had become in 3 weeks considerably better at putting thoughts away than he had ever been before. It turned out that the skill was learnable. It turned out that the mind had compartments, and that you could close them, and that what was in them didn't stop being in them, didn't stop being true or real, but could be made quiet enough that you could hear the rest of the world. This was what Marcus had meant. Build things around it. Eventually, he said, "I think so." Marcus nodded. He got in his car. He drove away. Danny stood on 5th Street alone for another minute in the cold November morning. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and felt the paperback, the broken-spined Stephen King novel he'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. He pulled it out. It fell open to page 211. He read the sentence his eyes landed on. He read it twice, and the second time it seemed to mean something different from the first, something larger. And he didn't know if that was the writing, or the morning, or just what happened to words when you'd been in a building with something that used them. He closed the book. He got in his car. He did not look back at the ruins. He was good at that now, at choosing not to look at things. Marcus had told him it was the whole trick, and Marcus was right, though Danny suspected the trick had a cost that he wouldn't fully understand for years yet. The cost of all the things you chose not to look at, accumulating somewhere behind you. The weight of the unlooked-at world building up like sediment, like interest on a debt you'd agreed to carry. He would carry it. He would build things around it, the way Marcus had said, the way people build levees along rivers they know will flood, carefully, with full knowledge that the water is there, hoping the construction holds. The construction of ordinary days, and ordinary drives, and ordinary phone calls to his mother that were not about the Mercer Building, and not about what said his name in the dark, or the sound that cut off mid-syllable when the last wall came down. He drove north on 5th Street toward the rest of the morning, the precinct, the ordinary work of a day, the human city going about its human business around him. His phone showed 3 bars of signal, which was normal, which is how it always was outside the Mercer Building. He texted his mother, just thinking of you. She called back in 2 minutes. Her voice on the line was ordinary and warm, and exactly what it had always been. He answered,
"Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more interesting stories."